I'm Adam Pascarella, and welcome to episode 25 of The Power of Bold.
From New York City, it's The Power of Bold, the podcast on risk-taking, entrepreneurship, and bold living. Join us as we interview world-class performers, analyze life-changing books, and gather actionable insights to help you achieve your goals. Here's your host, Adam Pascarella.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to this latest episode of The Power of Bold. I've got a real treat for you for this episode. I had an awesome conversation with Laura Vanderkam. For those of you who love TED Talks or who have read books on time management, you likely have heard of Laura. She is a writer, author, speaker, and expert on productivity and time management. She has authored books like What the Most Successful People Do Before Breakfast, 168 Hours, You Have More Time Than You Think, and most recently, a book titled Off the Clock, Feel Less Busy While Getting More Done. Her TED Talk titled How to Gain Control of Your Free Time has been viewed over 5 million times. She's also a co-host of a podcast titled Best of Both Worlds. If you're someone that struggles with time management or would like more time to do the things you really want to do, this is the perfect episode for you. In our conversation, Laura discusses things like the value we can find by tracking our time, the issues with prioritizing busyness, how technology can make us feel like we have less time, why we should pay ourselves first and prioritize creative tasks on Monday mornings, and why building adventure into our lives is easier than we think. It's a conversation with actionable insights, so if you'd like to go back and read a transcript of the episode, you can find it at thepowerofbold.com. Okay, without further ado, here's Laura. My guest for this episode is Laura Vanderkam. She's a time management and productivity expert who's the author of several books, most recently an awesome book titled Off the Clock, Feel Less Busy While Getting More Done. She's also the co-host of the podcast Best of Both Worlds. So Laura, thanks so much for appearing on The Power of Bold.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Well, I've got to say time management is a topic that admittedly I struggle with, and I think a good number of listeners are in the same boat. So I'm really happy to have you here to share some of your own personal stories and insights on productivity and time management. So I suppose to start off, it's really interesting how you've devoted all of this time and energy into studying concepts like productivity and time management. You're clearly a curious person, and you could have focused on any other area. So what is it about these ideas and concepts that fascinate you?
Well, I think the key thing is that everybody has the same amount of time. There's very few resources one can say that about. People don't have the same amount of money. They don't have the same amount of various things. But we do all have the same amount of time. And so when you meet people who are doing amazing things professionally, and then you also find out they have really cool personal lives too, right? They're not making these harsh trade-offs that everyone says success requires. It's not that they have any more time than anyone else. So they are perhaps choosing to allocate their hours in interesting ways that everyone can learn from. And so I've long been fascinated by this. And certainly I don't think anyone grows up saying, oh, I want to be a time management and productivity expert. Nor is there anything in particular you might study in school that would lead you to this topic. But I began, writing about people's schedules, and I was asking them about that and began writing more about the topic. And, once you write one book on a topic, you tend to become known for it. And so I really found it fascinating. It's also a topic where I think prevailing wisdom is often wrong. Mm-hmm. People have ideas of how they spend their time, but many of those ideas are just based on stories they are telling themselves and not on actual evidence. And getting that evidence often turns many of those stories on end. And I find that pretty cool too.
Can you talk about the prevailing wisdom being wrong a little bit more? Like what's the most common misconception that you hear from people that say, oh, I don't have enough time to do X, Y, and Z?
Well, a lot of people think that they work around the clock or at least work extremely long hours. And you ask them how many hours do they work, and they'll tell you a number like 80. It is almost universally not true.
Right.
And there was. I love to talk about a study comparing estimated work weeks with time diaries that found that people claiming 75 plus hour weeks were off by 25 hours. And what it is, if you get paid by the hour, you know how many hours you're working, right? But if you don't, if you're in a salary job, and especially if it's north of 40, like people tend to think it's a lot north of 40, even if it may not be. And people feel like they're working hard, feel like they're working long, and so they put a high number on it. But is that number true? Well, I don't know, but it's good to find out, because if you find out what your number is, you can make good choices within that time, and maybe figure out if you want to change it over time. But just pulling a number out of the blue doesn't help anyone. So I think that's a common misperception. People underestimate how much free time they have. I mean, people will tell you, like, on Twitter that they have no free time. And, like,
yeah.
You're on Twitter.
Exactly.
Let's just stop right there.
It's just how you choose to spend it. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
And in your exploration of time and where our time goes, you actually took a pretty drastic step of monitoring how you spend your own time. You spent an entire year tracking your time. And I can somewhat relate, not to the extent that you did. I practiced law at a large corporate law firm. So I had to track my billable and non-billable hours. And I think if you ask many attorneys what one of the worst parts of their job is, they'd say tracking their hours. It's a very laborious process. So I give you major credit for sticking with it for that full year. But I guess considering all of that, can you first explain to listeners how you went about that process of tracking your time? Did you kind of sit down with a pen and paper at the end of the day, or was it more intense than that?
Well, I use spreadsheets, which hopefully I didn't just send like half your listeners turning off the podcast right now. It's really simple. It has half hours along the left side and the days of the week across the top. And so it goes Monday at 5 a.m. to Monday at 5 a.m. And I just, check in like 3 times a day and write what I'd been doing since the last time. And as you can imagine, if I'm only checking in 3 times a day, it's relatively high level. It's not, generally I'm not saying what exact work project I'm doing. Sometimes I do, but sometimes I don't. So it's certainly not like a lawyer billing time that way, where every 6 minutes has to be accounted for. Sure. I'll put in like just stuff like drive kids to this place, or, make dinner, or watch TV, or sleep, read, very broad categories. Because I think it's more important to get the general sense of where the time goes as opposed to documenting every single minute. Mm-hmm. And so because I'm only checking in 3 times a day, and it only takes me about a minute each time, I mean, we're talking a 3-minute daily habit, which is the same amount of time I spend brushing my teeth. Right. So it's really not that onerous a process, unless anyone's going to complain about toothbrushing. It's really about the same thing. Mm-hmm. But I mean, I've actually done it for 3 years now. I went for 1 year, and I found it so fascinating that I've just kept going, for many reasons. I mean, one, I think it's always good to be intentional about time. I like to see if things are trending up or down. I like to see what's the same and what isn't. But it's also a good way of kind of keeping memories of my life too. Because in a way it's a journal, but it's a journal that tells you everything, as opposed to a normal written journal. People just write about the highlights or how they were feeling about it. So this, I can see like what I was doing, and then, know what I did before and what I did after the highlight. And so it's kind of good for cementing memories. Mm-hmm.
I guess backing up a little bit. So why did you actually decide to take that on in the first place? Because I think even people would like to do that, yet the idea of spending a year just tracking your time feels too burdensome for people. So how did you?
Yeah, nobody needs to track a year.
Right.
That's just me. I mean, I write about this, right? So I knew I could write about that. If I tracked my time for a year, I could write about it for places. And I still write about my time logs now. So it's sort of this never-ending font of content for me. Most people don't have that professional reason to do it, so they wouldn't. But I think anyone could see benefit from tracking their time for a week. Mm-hmm. A week tends to be the cycle of life as we actually live it. And so tracking a week will give you a pretty good holistic view of where your time really goes. So yeah, if you're feeling overwhelmed, or you're feeling like maybe I'm spending time on things I don't like to, or maybe I'm, just not sure about stuff, it's a good way to figure out, well, am I spending time on the things that are important to me? And if so, awesome. And if not, what can you change?
Right. Well, that's definitely a very clear value proposition. But I guess from your own experience, what were some of the most interesting or fascinating insights that you gathered from doing this?
So I had a couple that I've actually, made some interesting changes with. One, when I first started, the first year I tracked, I kind of had in my mind that I didn't really read that much. Like I didn't have that much reading time in my life. I started tracking when my youngest child, I have 4 kids. My youngest kid was 3 months old. So, 3 kids age 8 and under, and 4 kids age 8 and under, like, working, everything, there wasn't going to be time to read, right? Like that was the story I'm telling myself. I track my time and I see that I was reading a fair amount. It was just, most of it was like the magazines that keep showing up at our house, like due to the magic of auto renewal. The, online articles, comment section, like I was reading, it just wasn't good stuff. And so once I saw how much time I was reading, I read like 327 hours that first year, which is almost an hour a day. It's like, you could read a lot of really good books in 327 hours. I said, well, let me do that. Like if I've got 327 hours to read, I should read real books in that time as opposed to this junk. And so I did start becoming a lot more intentional about my reading life and have been able to get through a lot of really awesome literature since I made that decision.
Oh, that's really cool. And yeah, it empowers you to discover that the time is there. You're just choosing it, whether consciously or subconsciously, on doing other things like watching TV or Twitter or things like that. And I guess I'm curious, since you've been doing this for a while, is there any technology out there that makes it easier to track your hours, or you just kind of have to just do it by hand and just reflect?
Oh yeah, I mean there are dozens of, if not more, time tracking apps on the market. Certainly because there are people who are lawyers, accountants, whatever, who need to bill time, and so it's an easy way for them to automate it is to use one of these apps. Or people who are self-employed and billing lots of different clients for their work might wind up with a time tracking system, or for their employees as well. I mean, if you think about it, it's not that different from a normal payroll system, like where people punch in and punch out. Like, sure, you need to track hours. So you can adapt that same sort of technology for personal use. So yeah, there's lots of apps, but I chose not to use them. Partly that I'm just not all that technologically savvy. I also don't always have my phone with me. And I felt like I wouldn't want to stop and imprint stuff, a couple times a day through the phone. I'm, for whatever reason, using my laptop seems easier for that, to just come in, 3 times a day and do it. And also, there are a lot of productivity apps out there, but it's always this double-edged sword, because the more apps you have on your phone becomes more interesting. And in general, the cause of productivity is not served by spending more time on your phone.
Right. Even though people think that is the case, right?
Yes.
Right. They can work wherever they need to. They can take any call, all those things. So I guess the bottom line is, for people, they should, if they're curious, try it out for a week or two and see what happens. They may gain some really interesting insights from doing that.
Yeah, only a week is fine. And I think you can do pretty much anything for a week, especially if it only takes a few minutes a day. But at the end of the week, you can look back and see what you liked and what you didn't, and hopefully it'll be enlightening.
Go from there. Cool. So I'd just like to spend a few minutes just talking about some of the pressing problems of time management. And I feel like, at least for Americans, there's this tension. We all want more time to do the things we truly want to do, to have sort of that liberating off the clock feeling you mentioned in your book, which is the title of your book. But on the other hand, Americans really take pride in being busy. And I suppose the argument goes that busyness shows we're important, that we're needed, that we have many responsibilities. And at least in a commercial law firm where I worked, your identity was almost baked into it. You were directly compensated based on the number of hours you billed. So what do you think about that tension, kind of the push and pull between wanting more free time, yet kind of appreciating those feelings of importance that are attached with busyness?
Yeah, well, that's probably why a lot of lawyers wind up quitting, right?
Yeah, right.
Becoming more efficient does not in and of itself help you. I mean, it does over time if you can bill a higher percentage of your hours, but, and you don't have to seek out work, or it's coming to you. Those are all things that allow you to bill more time. But, it is still that you are rewarded more for working 50 hours than working 40, even if you are very effective in the 40.
Right.
So I think that you hit the nail on the head with your discussion that, saying we're busy makes us feel important. Because if you think about it, the whole idea of busyness is like I have a great deal to do, which means that the demand for my time is high. And the reason that demand for my time is high is because I am important. And we wouldn't walk around saying like, I am important. Like, I want you to know just how important I am. So instead it's like, oh, I'm so busy, right? Because that's a nice way to say that everyone wants a piece of you, at work and at home. So there's a certain aspect of that people like to talk about just how busy they are. I mean, the problem, of course, is that we start to believe it. And we start to believe that we don't have time for the things that are important to us. And so, I challenge people, a couple of things. One thing is just stop using the word busy. It's a simple enough change, but like whenever somebody asks you, how's life? How was your weekend? Like, don't answer busy. That's a pretty boring answer if you think about it. Just answer something else. Say, oh, it was great. We went out to dinner at this wonderful restaurant. Have you been there? That's a much better conversation, right? Or, I volunteered at this place. Have you ever heard of this group? Those are discussions that actually go somewhere as opposed to like, I'm busy. So change your conversations. The tracking time can help you get a sense that maybe there is more time there than you have thought. And hopefully people will find that liberating as opposed to disappointing. Some people find it disappointing. Like, oh, I thought I worked 65 hours and I only worked 45. Well, let me tell myself that this was an atypical week. Let me go find another week to track. So, or you could just celebrate. Like, look how much I'm getting done in 45 hours a week. I'm awesome.
Exactly.
That would be a better way to approach it.
Yeah. And I don't know, a lot of the time too, it seems like people kind of just let inertia take over. They aren't making active choices. They're kind of letting their schedule control them. And even if they do have a busy schedule, they take pride in being busy like that, like I was saying earlier. So, I mean, one of your messages, I'm sure, is that you have to take control of your own schedule, your own life, so to speak. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I totally agree. And you can have a lot of activity in your life and yet still also have space for really cool things too. I tend to like the word like full instead of busy. And, especially like our weekends, for instance, they had kids and lots of different things and various activities for them. But I still always manage to get my runs in, and I can do stuff with friends and have, downtime with my husband and all that. And it's just because I think through the time ahead of time. And I say, oh, well, this is when this is happening, and this is when I can do this, and this is when he can do this. And because of that, we have cool weekends. Whereas I think a lot of times it's easy to say like, oh, there's just so much going on, I'll never get to anything. And then, because you're not planning ahead, like you don't see that, oh, actually, if I do want to go for a run, the best time for me to do that is 7 a.m. Like it's not going to magically appear some other time of the day. So let me go ahead and get it done. It's just about being mindful of where the time goes and intentional. And when you are intentional, you can do a lot and yet not feel too busy.
Yeah. And just so the listeners get a sense of how you operate. So I understand that you kind of plan your week out on Friday afternoons. You at least prioritize what you want to get done in the next week. I guess first, how does that process actually happen of you planning? And second, why did you choose Friday afternoons?
Yeah, I always plan the week ahead on Friday afternoon, and there's a couple reasons for this. I used to do this Sunday evening, and then I happened to interview David Allen, who is a productivity expert that maybe a lot of your listeners have heard of or read some of his books, like Getting Things Done. But he talked about how a lot of his clients did their reviewing of their schedules and such on Friday, and as I thought about it, I realized this is really a much better time to do it. First, one of the reasons people feel kind of antsy and not relaxed on weekends is that they know something is coming up on Monday. They know there's things that they're going to have to deal with, but they don't have a good plan for dealing with it. And if you don't make that plan till Sunday night, it's kind of still hanging over your head the whole weekend. So whereas if you make that plan on Friday, well, then you're good. Like, you know what you're going to do when you get into the office on Monday. So like, you don't have to worry about it. The other good thing about Friday is that if you need to do things, like you need to cancel things, move things, get new meetings, whatever it is, you can actually do it because people are probably still at their desks. So, you can call them or email them and they'll respond, which they might not on Sunday night. But just a short list. So I make my priorities for the coming week. I like to make different categories, and I'd suggest your listeners try this too, is make a 3-category priority list for the next week. Professional, so career priorities, relationship priorities, so that's friends and family, and then self priorities, things you want to do for yourself. And the upside of making a 3-category list is that it nudges you to put something in all 3 categories.
Exactly.
Yeah, because you're not going to make a 3-category list and then leave a category blank. Like, just people don't do that. So that right there is going to nudge you to have this more balanced life. Because look, I'm doing something in all 3 categories in the course of the week. And, you look at your schedule, you see where you can plan those in, put them on the calendar. And if you do that, it vastly increases the chances that the stuff actually gets done.
I think that's an awesome point, especially for the relationship category. You mentioned this in the book as well, but especially for those people that are pretty career oriented, they may have a side hustle too. They're very busy with their career. They want to hang out with friends or maintain those close relationships that they have, but those are always kind of brushed to the side. They say, oh, when I have time, I'll go out for drinks or something. But by having that category, like you said, it forces you to really cater to that one pillar of the stool, I guess. Just really focusing on that part. So I think that's really important advice.
Yeah, no, I think it can be transformational because, as you said, relationship time, if you're very career focused, it tends to happen once everything else is done. And then the predictable flaw, though, in that is that if you have enough stuff going on, there won't be any time left over. And so then this stuff won't happen. It'll never happen. So plan it in first. You'll get the work done because you have to. I mean, you're a responsible person, so you probably will do it.
Right.
But planning in the relationships with that same sort of level of priority as you give to work vastly increases the chances that those things happen.
I suppose going back to blocking off time for the next week, do you give yourself rigid guidelines like, oh, this thing should take an hour or two? There's the idea of Parkinson's law, right, where the amount of time you allocate to a project, a project that maybe will take 3 or 4 hours, if you allocate 2 hours, you'll still get it done, that sort of idea. Do you really block it off like that, or how does that work?
I tend not to schedule too tightly just because I don't need to. I'm not in a corporate environment. I work for myself, so it's not like I'm getting put into meetings that I don't actively want to be in. Mm-hmm. So I don't need to do it quite as tightly. Now, somebody who's, before you even get to choose what you do with your schedule has 4 hours of meetings you have to attend each day, you're going to have to be a little bit more careful about it. You may have to say, well, I want to research this white paper that will help establish my expertise in this area. I know I want to devote 4 hours to it this week. Where can I find those 4 hours? And then you do need to look at your calendar very closely and start blocking it in. Someone like me doesn't necessarily have to do that as much. I will be very careful with open days. I really love to have open days. And so what I'll do is I will, schedule my calendar more tightly on other days so I can have open space for writing on another. So this week, for instance, I've been doing a lot of interviews about various things. Today, it's Friday. It was a good day. I knew I was going to be on the phone most of the day. It's good. Get it all done.
Right.
So I left. Thursday was completely blank. Nothing on Thursday. Now, of course, that doesn't mean I didn't work on Thursday because I did. But I spent much of the day editing a manuscript I had to do. And that was something I was really excited to do. But I knew if I was stopping every 2 hours to take a call, I wouldn't be as into it. I wouldn't be in the right flow for it. So I was very careful to pick that open. That works for you, but that's something that works for me.
And on Thursday, for instance, if you had any interruptions, like any would you be checking your email, or would you be addressing some interruptions that approach you?
As much as possible, try not to. I mean, I'm not saying I didn't check email on Thursday, but what I did is that I let it sort of stack up. I looked at it to see if there's anything urgent, maybe twice on Thursday. And then today, in between my calls, because, if you schedule a call every hour, you're usually done 40 minutes or so, 45 minutes. So you have 15 minutes. So I deal with the email in those 15-minute slots. And the upside of that is that, then you're not giving email your best time. Mm-hmm. Whereas if I'd been I got to clean out my inbox on Thursday. Well, no, Thursday's my day for editing this manuscript, which is actually a top priority for me. The email, not so much. The email can be cleaned out in little bits of time. The manuscript couldn't be done in little bits of time. So you want to make sure you match the right work to the right time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And speaking of technology, I mean, it seems like the 800-pound gorilla in the room, so to speak. It's just always around us. We're always connected. And I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if millennials, average checking their phone every 5 minutes throughout the day. It's just something that we just do now. And while it definitely can make us more productive and it isn't entirely terrible, can you maybe describe to the listeners how technology kind of interferes with our desire to free up our schedule and manage our time better?
Yeah, so for off the clock, I had 900 people with full-time jobs who also had families track their time for a day. And I asked them various questions about how they felt about their time. And so I could assign scores to them based on whether they had a high time perception or a low time perception, and sort of compare the schedules. And I found that people who with high time perceptions check their phones about half as frequently as the people with the lowest time perception scores. Mm-hmm. And, it seems that obviously there could be some correlation there, not causation. I mean, maybe people with more stressful jobs felt like they needed to check their phones more frequently. I don't know. I mean, there are reasons that could be. But there's been other studies that have been done that they have the same person, check email 3 times a day versus check it whenever they want. And when you're told to check it 3 times a day, you actually feel a lot more relaxed than when even though, if you only check it a couple times a day, like it seems like you might miss things and that would seem stressful, but it turns out it's not. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. I think what often happens is that we have free time and that we could devote to interesting and enjoyable things, but we choose to chop it up with these self-interruptions. So, it is, you got like an hour before bed. What do you do at that time? You could read a book. You could call a friend, or, if you're living with someone, interact with that person, have a glass of wine, chat, like have a good time, like go sit outside, stare at the stars. There's all these things you could do. Or you could like scroll through Instagram for 45 minutes. Sure. And, so it's a question of, well, what do you choose to do? And if you choose to look at your phone, turns out from my research and other people's that you will feel like you had less leisure time than if you were sitting on the porch with a glass of wine, talking with your partner and staring at the stars. I mean, that actually makes you feel like you do have time because you spent it in kind of a cool way.
I guess maybe going into the weeds a little, why does it feel like you have less leisure time? Does it just all the time scrolling just blend together, or how does it actually work?
Yeah, I think it's not memorable. It's not emotionally satisfying. And those are the ways that our brain remembers time, is that we have memories of things. But it's also just the constant stimulus, I think. It's mostly that it's forgettable, though, that it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel relaxing. There's, regardless of what you're looking at, although then sometimes the content itself makes people feel like, there's comparison is a really horrible emotion, the sense of jealousy, envy, and it is very difficult to avoid with social media just because, people are putting their highlights up. So, you might feel fine about your house until you looked at a photo of somebody else's house. Yeah. You feel fine about your job until somebody posted about their promotion. You feel fine about your relationship until somebody's posted the amazing place their spouse just took. It's just all this sort of thing. And they're not posting their low moments, and neither are you, of course, but they still exist. And so I think it's both the fact of chopping up our time, it's also the content of what is chopping up our time.
Mm-hmm. Well, to avoid that chopping up the time, pattern for someone that's really busy, I guess for their job, maybe that's the wrong way to say it, but maybe their job is demanding in that they have to be quick with email or they have to constantly be connected. Do you have any tips for people in order to kind of ease the burdens of time feeling like it's slipping when they're connected like that? Or how would you recommend people deal with that situation?
I mean, if you do have to be on email constantly for your job, you are still better off checking, say, once an hour consciously for 15 to 20 minutes and then being off for 40 to 45 minutes. All right. You can do a lot in 45 minutes. And most urgent things could at least wait 45 minutes, right? If you're checking 15 minutes on the hour, the longest somebody would have to wait is about an hour. And there's many reasons that could happen. You could be driving somewhere. I mean, you could be in a meeting. You could be whatever. There's reasons people might have to wait an hour to hear from you. There's also, you can push back on it a little bit. I know a lot of people who are in client services but work in teams might assign a person for each sort of after hours time to be the one dealing with client emails on the team. So, this person is on Monday night, kind of like a physician being on call. So you push the client to email everybody, right? Email the whole team. And then the person who's on call Monday night will respond to it on Monday night. The person who's on call Tuesday night will respond on Tuesday night, and so on. And so everyone's on, 1 to 2 nights a week, but then they're off the other ones. So that's kind of nice. And just like put the phone in airplane mode for a while. Like you can go a bit of time on nights and weekends and see what happens. I mean, maybe Earth will crash into the sun, but I'm guessing it won't. Like
Yeah.
we're not that important. Like, none of us are as important as we think we are.
Exactly.
And so, the Earth will keep spinning regardless of what you do. So if you want to be offline for a little bit, you probably can.
Yeah.
You can also address expectations with the people who work from you. And because of the work I do, I've done a lot of like corporate workshops, speeches, and, people ask me questions. I remember one workshop, a woman was talking about like, she had to have her phone with her at night because her boss was sending, emails at 9:00 at night. And she wanted to make sure she was on top of it and getting her what she wanted in their 24/7 company. And her boss is there. And her boss is like, I send emails at 9:00 because I'm with my kids from 6 to 8. They go to bed, and then I send emails afterwards because that's the time that works for me. It's not that I needed a response at 9 p.m. When she's just thinking about it, she assumes that the other person is also just on email at 9:00 because it works for her. But if it doesn't work for her, like they need to have this conversation. And so once they did, it's great. It's like, oh, well, I'm glad we got that out in the open, right? Have these conversations and make sure that you do know what the expectations are before you jump to any conclusions.
Exactly. Yeah. Just constant communication, expectation setting, those sort of things. And so I guess from there, we know that there's this problem of time management, and you have a TED Talk from 2016. It's really good. I recommend people check it out, and I'll post a link in the show notes. But one of the things you say in there is that the most successful people don't build the lives they want by saving time, like shaving off 3 minutes here and 3 minutes there. It's kind of more involved than that. They build the lives they want, and then the time saves itself. So can you maybe further explain to listeners what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of time management literature, if you read it, and I confess that I do all the time, hoping I'm going to find some like life-changing hack that will help me find hours in the day I didn't know existed. And, you read these articles and it's always tips like clean the shower while you're in it. Well, I don't know about you, but like I'm not spending a lot of my life cleaning the shower anyway, so that's not going to save me hours in my day. And, that's the problem with these hacks. I mean, occasionally there's stuff that's like kind of cool or interesting. Like there's no reason to spend more time on things that you don't like than you need to, but it's not going to be life-changing, right? Like there's very few of these hacks that will truly change your life. I see stuff like people say, if you send a lot of emails where the answer is okay, type K instead of okay. Like again,
Really?
You're not changing your life by doing this. Like you'll free up 2 seconds per email, even if you send 300 per day, that's 600 seconds. That's, 10 minutes. Awesome. Like, what did you do with that 10 minutes? I don't know. Probably not anything, again, life-changing. You're better off thinking about what you want to do more of with your life. Like, what do you want to fill your time with? What things would be meaningful and enjoyable for you and the people you care about? And the thing is, when you consciously fill your time with those things, put those things in first, give them priority space in your schedule, everything else naturally takes less time. I mean, I mentioned I was, deeply absorbed with editing this manuscript on Thursday. I wasn't on email all that much. I was caring because else I was more about doing. Whereas if I hadn't had this big project I was into, I probably would have been on email all the time. And same thing in personal lives too. Like if you're doing something really cool with your friends, like you're all going to go volunteer at a soup kitchen together on Saturday. Well, you'll spend less time puttering around the house doing pointless housework. You'll do what absolutely has to still get done, but because you got this other thing that's filling your time, like you'll naturally spend less time on the things that were less important. So make sure you put the good stuff in first, and then everything else will kind of be more efficient just by the nature of how we spend time.
Exactly. And in the book, you have this idea. It's also an investing idea or personal finance idea of paying yourself first, right? Kind of prioritizing. You take the creative angle. If you have a creative project you want to work on, like a screenplay or art, you prioritize that in your schedule to make sure it gets done. And I think you had one client that was an artist, or she was a would-be artist, one of those, and she was struggling with this, and you told her to work on her art on Monday morning, which maybe would seem counterintuitive to some people. So can you maybe explain why a Monday morning for your creative or passionate projects is the way to go?
Yeah, this is a writer who wanted to write a book.
Oh, okay.
And she had been working on it, telling herself she wanted to write a book for years. You know how this goes, these conversations. Like, yeah, I want to write a book someday. I was like, how do you make someday become reality? And she had been just, putting the time she'd allocated for it was Friday afternoon. She said, okay, like Friday late afternoon, that's when I'm done with all my client demands, all this other stuff. I will work on my project then. That's when I'm going to work on writing my book. Well, you can imagine how this goes, because Friday afternoon, like anything that didn't get done during the week is, she's trying to get it done before she goes out the door for the weekend, or else she's finally got it done, but then it's like 5 o'clock. You're not starting anything new on 5 o'clock.
Right.
Like, this is setting yourself up to fail. So, we talked about it, like moving that speculative work to first thing Monday morning, that she was going to work on this project from 8 to 10 a.m. on Monday morning. Now, it feels difficult to do that because, you could be using that time for your clients. There's things they want, but she was going to pay herself first. And by doing this one simple change, she was actually able to write the article that became a book proposal that actually became a book that came out this spring. And she's the same person. Like, she's just as good a writer, just as good a researcher, all this other stuff. The only difference is that she moved when she was devoting time to the speculative thing from Friday afternoon when it wasn't going to happen to Monday morning where she was paying herself first. Mm-hmm. And then it happened, and I think we all have things like that, it's the same thing as you said with personal finance. Like if you wait until the end of the month to save what's left over, well, guess what? Not going to be a whole lot left over.
Yeah.
If you save first, you'll probably get to the end of the month somehow, but you'll also have built wealth at the same time. So it's really about making sure that these things have the importance that they deserve within your life.
Mm-hmm. And you're a big proponent in the book of working in mornings, perhaps even earlier than 8 if you can do it. And as a night owl, I shudder to think of waking up at 5 or 6 to work. But you're a big proponent of that even for night owls. Can you talk about that a little more?
Yeah, I mean, if you are truly, truly a night owl, it's going to be hard to wake up at 5 a.m. to work. The way you can tell if you're a night owl is if you are truly doing your best work at night. Like, you're getting your best business ideas, you're actually writing that novel at night. A lot of people, when they think they're night owls, what they're saying is like, oh, I'm not a morning person. Mm-hmm. But the reason they think they're not morning people is that they're tired in the morning. But the reason they're tired in the morning is that they stayed up too late the night before, like, again, spending that 2 hours going through Facebook, looking at photos of people they didn't like in high school anyway, right? It's and that's not that you're a night owl. It's just that you're up too late. Like, it takes energy to go to bed and you're tired. And so you don't do it. Next thing you know, it's late and then the morning is shot. And so, I think that going to bed early is how grown-ups sleep in. If you can't really extend it in the morning, extending it earlier into the evening means that you can, you go to bed earlier, you wake up earlier, you turn those unproductive evening hours when you're just hitting next in the Netflix queue or you're, surfing the web, cut that off, go to bed earlier, wake up earlier, turn those unproductive evening hours into productive morning hours. Most people have more discipline and focus in the morning. Most people are able to do things in the morning without other people interrupting them. That is not true for everyone. Again, there are people who are night owls. There are also people who have, let's say, 3-month-old babies who wake them when they wake them. And that you just have to deal with them first thing. And it's just crazy making to try to wake up before they're in a good sleep schedule. Again, phase of life, that's not when you need to have that morning routine. But if you're not in that stage, and you might see if possibly you could wake up a little bit earlier some days. Some people find that, like if they live on the East Coast of the U.S., for instance, and they fly to the West Coast, and so they've gone to bed relatively early and they wake up at 5 a.m. and they get a lot done before their first meeting. They're like, wait, this is really cool. Well, you could actually do that on the East Coast too.
Yeah, sure.
You just have to, you're not used to it, but you could. So, consider it.
Definitely. And so we talk about that in the morning, perhaps waking up earlier. We talk about paying yourself first. But then there's the rest of the day to get through. And it seems like a lot of us have our routines that we follow. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of memories blend together, especially if you're following a routine. You're taking the same approach to work. You're coming home, doing the same sort of things. And in the book, you speak about building adventure into our lives to perhaps expand our perception of time and create awesome memories to look back on. And you have a good discussion of, I think, a woman living in New York City, and she wasn't really taking advantage of it to its fullest potential. I'm guilty of that. But she emphasized adventure. She did, a cool thing every week, and she had 52 stories to tell her friends. Not only that, but also to keep them in mind. So can you maybe speak more about how we can build this sense of adventure in our lives, and also why it's important? It seems pretty intuitive, but can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, the brain, when we think about how much time we have and how long something took, it's largely based on how many memories we have of that unit of time. So the more memory units we have of any given length of time, the longer it seems to take. So if you think about it, like the first day of a vacation somewhere exotic, like you have a dozen memories like by midway through the day. So the day seems really, really long. Whereas like a normal day is not like that at all. I mean, your brain is on autopilot most of the morning, and when you're commuting and getting to work, and you're not remembering any of it because there's nothing to distinguish it. And your brain knows it doesn't need to actually record it. Whereas if the vacation, like your brain doesn't know what it needs to remember. So it's remembering all of it. Mm-hmm. And so, you can't make every day like vacation. You can't make, or if you think back to certain times of your life, like most people have many memories of, say, the years ages 15 to 20, because so many firsts happened during those years. And so they're by their nature memorable, where you'll never have, your first date again.
Right.
Like you'll never have your first job again, your first time away at school. Like, so these are, you can't do things like that in your adult life, but you can consciously put in memorable things in order to have a few more memories of these adult times of life. And by doing that, you will make time feel more expansive. So the lady in New York City, she had challenged herself to do one uniquely New York thing every week. So she would seek it out. She'd be like, okay, this weekend I'm going to go see this comedy club, or I'm going to go eat dinner at this really famous restaurant, or I'm going to go for a walk in this certain park that's well known, or go see this exhibit somewhere. And so there's a couple of cool things about this. First, she had to plan it in. So then she'd start anticipating it. And the anticipation is a good way to stretch out your pleasure of any given activity. She'd do it, making memories during this time of something she'd never done before. And then afterwards, she'd have this story, and she was writing it down. So she liked to see, all these adventures she was having. And she becomes in her mind the kind of person who's having adventures, right? Like that's a key part of it too, is our identity as the sort of person who does cool things. I'm the kind of person who has the time to go see art exhibits, to go to comedy clubs, to go to cool restaurants. And so, because she'd done this, New York becomes this rich landscape of memories, and time feels more full and exciting, and not like it's just slipping through your fingers. So, wherever you are, you could probably do something like this, right? And say, well, what one adventure could I have this week? Or, maybe you want to challenge yourself a little bit more. Like, what adventure could I have every day? It would have to be a little bit less, exciting on the adventure front to fit it into your normal March Monday. But that was kind of the funny thing with Off the Clock. When I did this time diary study, looking at these 900 people's lives, it was a March Monday that I had them record. And the people with the highest time perception scores were highly likely to have done something really cool on Monday night. I mean, people went to a movie on Monday night. One woman went to salsa dancing lessons on a Monday night. Somebody went to a big band concert on a Monday night. Like, these are people who feel like they have the time to go to salsa dancing lessons. They're that's what makes them feel like time is more expansive.
Yeah, right. And they don't offer any excuses either not to do it. They plan it in their calendar and they execute. I think it's so easy, especially even think like a Tuesday, Wednesday night when you're kind of getting fatigued from the work week, even Thursday. It's easy just to say, oh, I'm tired, I need to rest. It's just easy to come up with excuses, and you obviously have to ignore that temptation and push on.
Yeah, no, think about if something will make a cool memory after the fact. And if you think it will make a really cool memory and it's something you were looking forward to, you can probably tell your present experiencing self to just do it, right? Yeah. Get over your reticence. You are going to remember this night more if you go to salsa dancing lessons than if you sit in your pajamas watching Netflix.
Exactly.
That's just reality. So you'll probably enjoy the salsa dancing once you're there. It's just getting yourself into the car and going that you got to get over that hurdle.
I even feel like once you're out the door of your apartment or house, once you physically take a step out, you automatically are are happier with your decision, you know, is the right decision.
And if you are truly fatigued, sometimes you do have to, listen to your body and all that. But if you are energetic enough to actually walk to the front door of your apartment, then you're probably good to go. So
exactly.
You'll draw energy from the meaningful stuff.
Now, throughout this whole discussion of time management, we haven't really talked about the concept of money, throwing money at a problem to free up more time. And everyone, has their own situation, but money does buy the freedom to do things we want. I am assuming you would agree with that. It's just a cost-benefit analysis of whether your time is saved by, exporting a task or delegating versus the financial cost of doing so. So how do you think about money when looking to save time?
Yeah, I think people would be well served by looking at money to save time. I mean, we will overspend on things and yet underspend on our own freedom. And in the long run, we value the freedom a lot more. So spend less on stuff. Like, people would think it's perfectly fine to buy a $100 shirt, but then, not spend that on, say, 6 hours of babysitting if they have young kids, for, getting some time freed up on the weekend so they could do something more relaxing. It's like, time is actually more valuable than that shirt. Like, you have other shirts, but you will never get that hour back. So if there was something, you want to go out to dinner or see friends, whatever, then it's a good investment of time, of money. Analyze your schedule. Like, I tell people, track their time. If you track your time, look at it and see, well, when was I counting minutes? Like, when was I miserable and hoping the time would go faster?
Yeah.
It's always a sad feeling that you want time to go faster, because time in the grand sense is kind of moving from one side of the hourglass to the other already. So the idea that you're trying to nudge it along is pretty depressing. So when were you feeling that way? And is there any way that money could make that better? So I know that when I have been stuck in airports, for instance, I will go try to find a really cool bar with a nice, with a view out the window, and find something cool to read. And I'll sit in there, order a drink that I like, read a good book, and try to make that time go better. And that's a way of throwing money at an issue versus just sitting there and stewing. Or if you are, long-term things, like if you are stuck in a traffic jam every morning at 8:30 because you're on your work and it's, you hate it. Maybe over time, could you, when your lease is up, move somewhere closer if you think you'll be at this company for a while? Or is there a way you could have a conversation about telecommuting 1 or 2 days a week, or, shifting your hours so you're not having to go at a time when everyone else is on the road? Like, these are all ways that you could think about freeing up this time that is so miserable for you. So figure out where those moments of misery are, and if there's any way that you could use your resources to make them less miserable.
That's definitely great advice. And I guess to wrap up here, what can listeners do today to get started on, becoming better time managers? What actionable steps can they take?
Well, we've been talking a lot about planning and adventures, so that's an easy thing and kind of a fun thing to do. So as you're listening to this, maybe you're on your commute on the way to work. What one adventure could you have today? Think about what this is so you can sort of look forward to it, and then enjoy yourself during it, and then think about it afterwards. Maybe think about how you tell somebody else about it so that you are recounting the details, and that way you get to live through your fun a second time. It doesn't have to be elaborate. Maybe you take your lunch and sit in a park instead of sitting at your desk. Or, you grab a work friend and go for a walk through a cool neighborhood nearby. Or maybe you do something at home, like you stop by an exhibit you want to see on the way home from work as opposed to going straight home. Or you even just, grab a great book you've been meaning to read and sit outside for a couple minutes, reading it at night as opposed to watching TV. But it's something you think will be really enjoyable. See if you can plan that adventure into your day, and you'll start to feel like you have more time.
Well, that's definitely good advice there. And this has been awesome, Laura. Thank you so much. You've got some great insights on time management. And finally, where can people find you if they want to learn more about you or about time management in general?
You can come visit my website, which is lauravanderkam.com. I hope your listeners will check out my new book, which is Off the Clock: Feel Less Busy While Getting More Done. I have a couple other time management titles too. Or, if you're looking for additional podcasts, you don't have enough of this one to last a week. You can listen to Best of Both Worlds, which is my podcast that looks at issues of combining work and a full personal life too.
Excellent. Well, thanks again, Laura. This was a fascinating discussion.
Well, thank you for having me.
Again, That was Laura Vanderkam, the author of Off the Clock and the co-host of Best of Both Worlds. Laura provided some awesome time management tips throughout the episode, but if you'd like to learn more, I'd suggest reading Off the Clock. If you find it interesting, Laura has written several other books on time management and productivity, as I said at the beginning of the episode, so we'll link to them in the show notes. While it may be an investment to read some of these books, the payoff can be great, so long as you execute. We can all take more control of our schedules. We just have to act. That's it for this episode of The Power of Bold. As always, we would greatly appreciate if you can leave a review for the show on iTunes or Google Play. It is immensely helpful, so thank you in advance. I hope you have an excellent 4th of July holiday, and as always, we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Power of Bold. For show notes and a transcript of this episode, visit thepowerofbold.com. Feel free to get in touch by visiting our Facebook and Twitter pages, and don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or Google Play. We'll see you next time.